Welcome to this special edition of our 2020 Ask an Elder series. During the next 3 weeks, we're going to provide you with golden nuggets from our inaugural 2020 series as we prepare to head into Black History Month. Join us as we reflect on preparing for the historic 2020 election season, discuss the historic victory and the potential impact of the increased visibility for HBCUs and the Divine Nine. Without further ado, part one of our best of Ask an Elder.
It's very important to go vote because it's very important to vote locally and for the presidency, but more so locally because you want district attorneys, sheriffs, and people like that, and police chief. You want to be sure you get the right people in office. But it's important to vote. Please, it's very important to vote. I vote always. I never miss my voting. Never. I don't care how busy I am or what I'm doing. I vote. I wish they'd make it a legal holiday so everybody could go and vote and without any problems or anything like that. But
why do you think voting matters?
Voting really matters. It's one of the most important things in life is to go vote. It's your right to go vote. And if you have a right to do something, go and do it. No excuses. Thank you.
I came home after not having voted, and a neighbor who had been a very good friend to call and ask me if I voted. And I said, this was primary. I said, no. She yelled out very loud, no matter what you have to do, unless you want this country in bad shape, you better vote the next time. And that stuck with me. It really did. She yelled all the way across the street. That stuck with me. And I've thought about her words with this election, but that was in 1967, 68.
Wow.
That was, and our country was in turmoil in 68 because of Martin Luther King's death.
Right.
Point is, that stuck with me. And I have never failed to vote since then, no matter what.
Wow.
And no matter what the election, I have voted. Douglas, one of my heroes, said, agitate, agitate, agitate. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't happen today, because if we agitate, 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 and now I say vote and vote and vote. And this time, vote and vote early.
Yes.
Get the same rights that everybody else has. There's no reason why I should pay taxes, or anybody who looks like me should pay taxes and not have the same benefit that everybody else has. But then you have something else. You have the advantage of our wonderful Black history. Our history is to be prized. We were enslaved, and having been enslaved, if you look 400 years down the road, no other group has been able to bring its young to the point that we have been able to bring ours. Sure, we got problems. We've got all kinds of problems. I know about the shooting in Southeast, but I also know about wonderful people like you. So that just as we have problems that have been left over because of the 400 years that we have had to fight since enslavement, we have tremendous accomplishments and beautiful young people. But the reason to vote is to use that history to make sure that your children and your children's children continue to make progress.
Why do you think voting why do you feel voting is important?
Oh, important. There's no words for what voting means. Voting is the opportunity that you get every 4 years and every 6 years to really send the people to the Congress and send the president to the White House to do your bidding. What do you find important? What do you think is things you would not be able to live without? Number one is being free. Now, being free is something we take for granted. But if you lived in some countries, you would know how very important that is. And the second thing is you look for being free and being able to live the place in the country that you like. You can go to any of the 50 states and it's yours. You can live there. If you want to be a swimmer and you think about it, your government plays a part in everything you do. First of all, teachers of anything, sports or the classroom. There's some subsidies from the government, from the House and the Senate. If you want to buy a house, you'll need gas, you'll need electric. You want a telephone, things the government's going to help you with. Do you want to have a business? The government can help you with a small business. Do you want to teach school? A lot of universities are run by the states and by the government with their help. Do you want to go on a trip? Inside America, there's some funds coming from the federal government. If you want clean air, they're the ones who help to keep the air clean. If you want clean water, streams, rivers, the ocean, they help to do all of that. Do you want to walk on a beach? They help to clean the beaches. Do you want to have your hair done at the hairdresser and look very smart? The hairdresser probably has some funding from the government. Everything you go to do, in some way, your government will be a part of that. So when you vote, you're not just voting for the president or the House of Representatives or the Senate. You're voting for your life.
But I have a question about when you hear people my age or a little older saying that their vote doesn't count or they don't want to go and vote, like what is your take on that?
I think it's more of a, and that's called apathy, right? And, there's a lot of good reason for apathy. And I think number one, it's intentionally created by people who don't want us to vote. It's not an accident, right? I mean, if you think about it in this country, right, other countries, voting is a big, huge deal. They have holidays. They take more than one day to vote. In this country, and see, here's what, right? Think about this, right? For the type of folks that I serve, which are lower income people in Philadelphia, single parents, people who just came home from incarceration. If you say the life of a single parent, say with 2 kids, right? So they got to work during the day or maybe overnight. They got to help the kids with homework and whatever. How do they fit voting in? The other thing is, too, when we look at, when people see that their lives are still the same, it's like, I know people like that, right? And this is one of the things that we're dealing now with in our voter engagement activities in Philadelphia and statewide, right? People say, my life is still the same and nothing has happened, right? But here's the point. I think what I found is voter education and showing people how their voices can be heard, right? And telling the stories about, John Lewis. If you haven't seen it yet, you got to look at his documentary, right? And Making Good Trouble, and talk about, and see, here's the thing. I'm old enough to remember those times. There's generations like your generation that are not associated with that, and it's hard to imagine, right? But I think that it's education and just putting, giving more emphasis on voting and why it's so important. So, the one thing that you probably don't know about me that you're learning is that I don't think that there's any problem that's too big that we can't solve together, right? You get a lot of smart people in a room and we could do a lot of different things, right? I mean, and trying to build, as Martin Luther King says, the beloved community, right? Where there's equity, fairness, right? And inclusion. Those are not just pie in the sky things, right? We do this. We could do this in our communities. We could do it in our cities. We could do it, and it grows. There's always going to be, the other side, right? That's going to push back against. But we just got to keep on doing it. Every generation, including yours, it's part of the rent that you got to pay to stay on the planet and have the liberties that you have, right? So I would tell future leaders, to come outside of yourself. Come outside of yourself. Exercise the love that you have in yourself to be of service to others, and that could take various forms. I mean, I don't expect everybody to be a flaming activist like me or whatever, like I've done all my life, right? But there's all sort of things. I mean, there's a woman who doesn't live too far from me, and what she's been doing is going around to where I live at. There's a lot of apartment buildings, right? You've been over our place, and there's a lot of apartment buildings, and a lot of them are senior places. So there's a woman, up the street, and what she's been doing is going around to all the apartment buildings, right, and giving people registration cards, making sure they get registered to vote. And at the same time, she says, does anybody need any food? Does anybody need anything, right? And I mean, look, that's love, right? And that's what we do. I mean, another lady that I work with, she done set up childcare services for people who got to work from home, right? And she's got it subsidized by the city so people can afford it, and she'll even do it for free so people can work, and so that their kids, I mean, she'll tutor them and all like that, right? Listen, this is the village, right? And so what I would say is, come out of yourself, figure some sort of contribution you could make. I mean, there's tremendous payoff for that in a personal way. And it's all about love.
I voted for the first time in 1960.
Wow.
And that was so important to me because I am a native Mississippian. I grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi. And of course, this was a time of segregation. And not many African Americans voted during, as I can recall, and at the time we were called Negroes. I'm old enough to have been colored Negro, Black, and now I'm African American. But during my time in Mississippi as a youngster, Negroes just did not did not vote. They were forbidden for the most part to vote, and those we had poll taxes for people who own property and could pay their poll tax. Then they could vote, but some of them were intimidated so that they were afraid to go to the polls. I can remember a mortician in my community, J.T. Hall, who decided that he had paid his poll tax. He was a businessman and he was going to vote. And I must have been around 5 years old at that time. And then one day I saw him because he had a house, like a weekend house across the street from where we lived. And he had bandages on his face. And I heard my grandmother and my aunts whispering, saying that J.T. Hall went downtown and tried to vote, and a group of white people accosted him and injured him, beat him because he was attempting to vote. Now, I tell you all of that just to say that voting is very, very precious to me, because I did have that experience in a community where coloreds were not allowed to vote, and they were not, those who could vote were intimidated so that some did not have the courage to vote. So I did not, during my growing up, I did not know many folk who were able to go to the polls. But the first time I voted, I believe I must have been 21 when I was able to vote, and I voted for President Kennedy. I was then living in Nashville, Tennessee. And by that time, there had been a lot of movement in the civil rights. There in civil rights, a lot of organizing. And of course, in Nashville, there was a push for us to organize and to be able to vote. And of course, the spotlight was on Nashville, so there wasn't much violence or much intimidation going on. And I can recall a group of students from Fisk and from Meharry, Tennessee State. We all went in groups and went downtown in Nashville to cast our votes. So I've been voting ever since, and I would not dare think of missing an opportunity to vote, because a lot of effort was put forth for us to have, us men, meaning African Americans now, to have the opportunity to vote, to cast our vote. So that is something that's very important, even today, when there's a possibility of intimidation. People should prepare and plan and do everything that they need to do to be able to cast their vote. I think as African American women, we have to always know who we are and not let anybody else define us. You have to know who you are, and you have to have that confidence about yourself. As as you attempt to achieve things in life. And you can't let what other people think or how they judge you deter you. I mean, obviously, she has encountered all of this for most of her career. She's been the first in many situations, and I'm sure this is not the first time she has been judged harshly. But what that tells us, and what that should tell you, is that you don't let what people say stop you. You must persevere. You don't let other people define you. You must keep going, set your goals, work hard, and always be yourself.
You know, there's no guarantee that my vote is going to be for winner. And that's not necessarily my primary reason for voting. It's certainly, I have my choices, you know, but even if there's if I just like one candidate more than the other, and it's in my political party, I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote. And the reason that I'm going to vote today at 70 almost is because of what we did when I was 18 and what my mother did when I was 15. My mother was in the March in the Resurrection City. You know, she was down there fighting for the right act. She was working with the you know, and I come from that group of liberal Democrats, you know, who struck the sign and broke it. Even today, that's one of my main reasons that I'll vote. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, man. I'm not sure what city councilman is going to do more for me than the other one. You know, but it's on the ticket.
Yeah.
It's on the ticket. Do just a little bit of research, you know. But the reason I have this hope for us is because over my life and experience, that we have more power than we realize. You know, if we could somehow come up with not a Martin Luther King, but a dynamic. I think Barack could do it. A dynamic, magnetic personality that could, through oration, you know, and deeds, you know, how to become more cooperative with one another. So that when our competition, we're not to see each other as competition, but to find a way to work together to open up doors.
Going on, I made it I just made it part of who I am, to make sure that I never vote without having a full understanding of who I'm voting for and what it is that we as African Americans are looking for, and because yes, because well, first of all, we need to get rid of that one vote does not matter. All votes carry the same weight, the same weight. So how is it that it cannot matter? Voting is everything, because we, I was reading a book by a young lady that's talking about class. And we are in a certain class. And we've been in that class for a long time.
And so it's time to break that.
We've seen some improvements, but we've also seen some fallbacks. And we are nowhere near where we think we should be even today. And that's a long, long time. That's over 200 years. 200 years of not being a full person.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think that's an important aspect of voting. The fact that we didn't always have this opportunity. And so having it is something important to practice, because that's a type of freedom and right that we get.
Yeah, I remember when I first learned to drive, like my grandmother wanted me to drive her to vote in Arkansas. And I drove her to the post office, and the postmaster was at the door to meet the Black voters that came into the place to vote. And he would say, "Oh, hello, auntie and uncle." They didn't call you by name. That that was on a day like that because they were trying to influence you. Uh, just give me your ballot, and I'll put it in the box for you. My grandmother would say, "Well, let me just look around a while in your store." And she would look around until she got to the box, and she would put her own vote in the box, which means that he couldn't get it out and do something with it.
Exactly.
There were people who were coming, and they would stop at the door and hand him their ballot, and they would go back and get in their car and go home. And of course, he would fold it up and put it in his pocket. So I witnessed this as a teenager because I was very young. I didn't even have a driver's license, but I was able to drive her to the post office.
And I think that's an interesting experience that you remember as a kid, because now the way that we're voting with COVID-19 sort of altering, balloting or polling places and things like that, and the whole controversy with the post office and mail-in ballots, we're seeing a lot of voter suppression be less disguised than it ever was before. And a lot of people are starting to call attention to those kinds of things, and people are being very careful about their votes. I did a mail-in ballot, and even during Georgia's runoff between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams, my vote wasn't counted because I did a mail-in ballot, and it was never registered by the post. So I think that's like a very important statement in the fact that we're still having these issues with voter suppression and people's votes being discarded.
Okay. Well, my first voting experience was a little bit after I graduated from Morgan in 1960. And that was the election of President Kennedy, and I believe he was running against Richard Nixon. And I had been in the South most of my life, and I grew up in the era of things were not equal. And one of the things, as far as voting was concerned, you had to prove that you could read. And so when I went to register, I was in New York at the time, and I went to register to vote. And I'm saying, okay, what should I take with me? And so since I had just graduated, I took my diploma. And I remember this white lady was quite astonished. So I didn't have to read anything. I guess she figured since I had graduated from college, I was able to read. And so that was my experience. Say because this is a presidential year, everybody's looking at the top of the ticket. But we as people have got to vote down the ticket, no matter whether it's the presidential election or off-year election where you're voting for the governors or their senators, or you always were voting for your Congress, but you got to vote down the ticket. You got to understand what their positions are as well, because a lot of the judges, local judges, are voted in locally. So you need to know those judges who are being voted in, what they stand for. So it's not just the top of the ticket. You vote down the ticket. Don't just vote the top and leave. Vote down the ticket. Know what the issues are. And here in the county, I'm in Prince George's County, we have two major questions on the ticket. So you need to know what those tickets are and how it possibly could impact you, so you can make an informed vote. You need to understand the judges, what their positions are and some of the things that impact you, because they said politics is local. That's what they mean. Politics is local because these are the people you're voting for that's in your area that's impacting your life. And so it's not just about the top of the ticket. Please vote down the ticket as well.
That's great advice. And speaking of advice, what advice would you give first-time voters?
go, show up. If you are registered, show up. Don't stay at home and say, my vote don't count. Every vote counts. Now, if you remember back, I don't remember what year it was when they had to look at the vote in Florida, I believe it was, and the hanging chads, they wouldn't have to do that if it had been so far one way or the other. But, every vote counts. And just, people have suffered and died and been beaten for the right to vote. So it says to me, our ancestors who did all of that work, like the John Lewis of the world, all I can say is, please, please just step out and vote. Even if you don't understand it all, if you just want to vote the top of the ticket, but make sure you make your voice heard.
This message has been brought to you by the National Black Leadership and Empowerment Project.